I spent 4 days with Tony Robbins in his Unleash the Power Within program. I have to say, on the morning of day one, I was not in a good place. I was full of anxiety and stress and thinking, what had I done? I'll tell you why in a minute. Welcome to Richer Soul, your journey to a more purposeful, intentional, amazing life. Where are you going to go and how are you going to get there? Let's figure that out together. At the core is the financial well-being to be able to do what you want, when you want, how you want. It's about personal freedom and abundance. Please check out the Facebook page, facebook.com/Richer Soul. That's where I share interesting articles that I've read this week. Also, if you visit the website, richersoul.com, you can sign up for my email list. I don't send emails very often, but if there's something important or some bonus material, that's the best way for you to find out about it. So take a moment to sign up, and I will be releasing an ebook later this year to my subscribers on that list. If you hear something interesting and think it could benefit others, please share the podcast. And people will thank you for doing so. So, are you creating the life you deserve? My goal is to help you figure out how your puzzle pieces come together to design a great life. That means we have to understand where we're going. In other words, what's our purpose? We also need to be healthy enough to be able to do what we want and have the time to be able to do so. We need the financial resources to fund the life we choose. Living alone gets kind of lonely. So creating strong relationships and being part of something bigger spiritually. While we all know this, yet we seem to be stuck listening to those voices in our head that create fear and hold us back from the life we deserve. If you have not listened to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create balance and abundance in your life. So, registration for Tony's event was Wednesday night. It was a madhouse. My wife was 2 hours late to meet us, and we couldn't wait for her to register. And so she had to do it in person, and my daughter was with me. She already had hesitations about the whole event because she had to sign these waivers about walking on fire and how they weren't responsible for anything. We were constantly being given the wrong information, sent from one long line to another. There were problems with the computer systems and getting us all checked in. We're in Newark, New Jersey, which isn't exactly a nice place to be. After getting through all the registration, finally heading back to the hotel, which we spent more time than I need to driving in circles trying to find the right exit ramp to get to where we wanted to be, I wasn't in a good place. Quite frankly, I think Tony does this on purpose so he can show you how to change your state. I know that when things don't go the way I want and people are giving me all kinds of conflicting bad advice, I tend to freak out. And that's where I was on Thursday morning. There was a lot of uncertainty and I didn't know how it was going to all unfold. And at that point, I didn't have a lot of confidence in Tony and his ability to pull this program off, even though I had known he had done it thousands of times before. All three of us decided to sit apart. My daughter was part of a teen group through Tony's foundation, so she was with 30 kids from all over the world. My wife in a different row, not too far away from where I was. As is her style, she was making friends with everyone. And little by little, my anxiety was subsiding. Once Tony took the stage, it was gone. I was thrilled to be there, and I never looked back. He is an amazing, one-of-a-kind man. A disease caused him to grow that tall, and a hard life growing up gave him the drive and desire to understand people. He only has so many shows left as his voice box is failing. He currently does day 1 and day 3, and his partner does day 2 and day 4. And it's clear no one can take Tony's place. He is one of a kind. I'm going to share with you what I learned over those 4 days. Going into this event, I did have a couple of concerns. Number one, I knew that the days were going to be long. They're generally in excess of 12 hours. There's not a lot of food, and they don't stop. How are you going to have the energy to be able to do that with hardly any sleep and food and be able to take it all in? And I've got to say, this is something that Tony definitely knows how to do. The energy level in that place is constant. The attention level is 100%. And for someone like me who's got a bit of adult ADD, to be able to focus on that was just phenomenal. One of the first things that Tony did was give the adults the permission to be a child. He told a little bit of a story, and you think about it. When you see a puddle, how do we react today? When you're a kid and you see a puddle, you only have one thought: to run all the way up to it and to jump in it and splash. As an adult, we see that puddle now as a problem, something we have to get around, something that causes bad negative feelings within us. And one of the things Tony wanted to do was to remove all of that and to look at life and to just be that kid again who can run into that puddle and jump and splash and enjoy themselves. Now, Tony's here to influence us, and he said that in order to influence someone, you have to know what already influences them. So if you understand how people are already influenced, then you can use those types of influences to change their behaviors. Another one, someone who's easily influenced by TV or by books, or maybe there's a particular person who influences them. If you know how they make decisions and how they go about changing, you can use those same methods to influence that person. We talked a lot about the state that we're in, which is an energy state, a mental state. And one of the things that Tony taught us was how to switch our state in a fraction of a second. Let's think about that for an example. If you have a death in the family, all of a sudden your whole life turns around. In a fraction of a second, your state is changed. You get into an accident, the same thing. External forces are changing our state. But what if we have the power to change the state we're in ourselves in that same fraction of a second? So there are two forces to changing the state you're in. It's the blueprint you have, and we've talked about these unconscious behaviors before. Rules of society, expectations, whatever our beliefs are. And then also the emotions. Tony says emotion is nothing more than energy in motion. And we are all full of energy. Our heartbeat is done by an electrical impulse that goes through the heart that sets off those contractions constantly moving back and forth. So one of the things we have to do is to overcome ourselves. And one of the things that Tony said is, people don't piss you off, you piss you off. In other words, we're the ones who are probably upset, angry about a particular thing, and someone else comes along and does something, and it sets us off. But in the reality, we were already in that state. We were already in a place that we were waiting, and we just needed that excuse. Most of us live in a box. And one of the things that this weekend was great for is crushing the boxes that you live within. And to be able to go back and visit the scripts and the rules and the expectations that created the beliefs we have today, to understand where they came from, and then to challenge if they are real and to tear them down. I think for my wife, that was one of her biggest takeaways this weekend. So you've got to create the energy in yourself. Everyone else is going to pull you down, and it's up to you to be able to do that. One of the other things that we do to ourselves is that we downplay achievement and success. And I think maybe it's a societal thing when someone comes up to you and says, "Oh, that's a beautiful dress you're wearing." And what do we say? "This old thing, oh, I just got this so long ago. It wasn't that expensive." What are we doing? We're downplaying ourselves instead of just accepting the compliments and saying thank you. One of the things Tony taught us is just to celebrate for no good reason. Go ahead and just celebrate. It seems that we constantly celebrate for sports wins, so we clearly want to celebrate, and we celebrate because somebody else won, which is kind of funny in my mind. Why not just celebrate for our own wins, the things that are going well in our life, and to be grateful for those? And I've started to do that more and more myself. I wake up in the morning, and I'm in a soft, comfortable bed, in a climate-controlled room with water and flush toilets at my fingertips. And I realized that 100 years ago, this wasn't possible. This isn't the way people lived. We're living in a time of abundance, and we should be happy for that. We should celebrate it and be grateful. As part of this, Tony asks us to ask 3 questions that we must answer. What stops us from moving forward, taking action, and being our best? 2, what controls and determines the quality of our lives? And 3, why do we do what we do? What are the ultimate drives behind all human action? So what keeps us moving forward? We've already talked about it. Fear. Fear constantly keeps us from getting ahead. And it's natural because not that long ago, fear is what kept us alive. If you have to live in a world without all of the wonderful things we have today, and you're out in the wilderness, fear is what keeps you from being eaten by an animal. It's what stops us from doing things that may essentially end up killing us. So through these things, there are 2 things, and we've talked about this, is we sometimes feel that we're not enough, and if we feel we're not enough, we won't be loved. And so people do everything they can to overcome feeling not enough and to want to be loved. And a lot of times we make bad decisions and get in bad relationships because we want the underlying thing, which is to be recognized and to be loved. We all create patterns in our lives for our emotions and the way we behave. And for those of you who are parents who have 2 kids, you can sometimes ask yourself, how is it that my 2 kids have grown up in the same household and they end up so vastly different? And it's because we each perceive things in our own ways. We each create our own patterns. 2 of us can be in the same situation and have a different reaction to it. We need to understand what those patterns of our emotions are and how we behave, and whether or not those choices are rational. Tony talks about why do we do what we do, and that there are 6 human needs. 4 of them are very basic primal needs, and 2 are much more of spiritual needs. The first one is certainty. We all want to be certain that we have a house, food on the table, and that basic security. We also want a certain amount of uncertainty, a certain amount of change, a certain amount of excitement. That's probably why sports and movies relate to us so much. The third thing is we want significance. We want to feel special. This thing is driven out with ego. It's one of the biggest things that we face. And when you feel insignificant, it causes considerable mental stress. Then we also want to feel connected and loved. It's funny, this is one where we sometimes fear love and we're okay being connected. And I think that comes out most often in dating relationships, where we are afraid of being turned down. The two spiritual needs are growth, which is constantly learning and growing as a person. And then the other one is contribution, which is giving back and helping others. And giving back, I think, is the one that gives the most satisfaction. He actually took a survey during this thing, and the number one things that came up for people in the crowd was that they wanted certainty and significance. So they wanted to make sure that all their needs were met and that they had recognition. However, when asked what they wanted, there were three that came across as the top, and that was love and connection, growth personally, and contribution. So everyone was leaving behind certainty and significance to gain the next level. In listening to Tony, I think that's really what the core of Richer Soul is about. Most of you have money or are well on your way to financial success. And I know for me, I had a simple goal when I was young, which was to be a millionaire. And as time went on and the value of the dollar went down, the size of the millionaire pot grew. And when I finally achieved all of that and had the financial success, I realized that there was still a lot missing. And while that gave me stability, in a certain sense, it gave me significance, it didn't give me meaning and more of what I wanted from life. And in meeting other millionaires, most of them tend to be the same way. Those who still want certainty and significance are probably the ones who are most unhappy with their life. Even though they have so much, they still struggle and are depressed and are rude and mean. Within these areas, there's also a certain amount of a paradox. So in some senses, we want certainty. We want to make sure that everything is done the way we want it and we're secure, but we also want variety. But variety can also mean failure, that things don't go the way that we wanted. And so a paradox appears there. There's also a paradox between connection and significance. See, when we want significance, where are we focused? On ourselves and how great we are, which does nothing for connection. But when we focus on the connection and the other person, all of a sudden, we get, in a sense, the significance because they celebrate us because of how much we've done for them. So learning to find the balance and to change our focus in these particular areas. So shifting gears slightly, some of the things that also came out is that we need to see things as they are, not worse. People avoid change for fear of failure. The morning of this event, I saw everything as horrible. That was my own fault. I didn't see it as it truly was. We need to overcome ourselves with that. The other thing we need to do is to control our state and how we feel. Too many people use food, alcohol, and shopping to change our states. And while they all work in the moment, it doesn't last. And each and one of those things can cause things to be worse after the fact. So if you overeat, drink too much, or shop too much, while you feel good in this moment, the repercussions of those choices make things even worse on the other side of the day. Unfortunately, the average person is willing to settle. We're all willing to settle for a little bit less to stay in our comfort zone. And we've got to learn to reach comfort zone to achieve what it is that we want. So, you are not the manager of your circumstances. You are the creator of your life. If you think about it, we've had a lot of people on the show. They've talked about how they grew up with money. And most of them didn't grow up with money. Most of them didn't grow up learning about money. Yet they took control of their life regardless of the circumstances that they came from. And they took responsibility. They had focus. So when you have the power of absolute clarity and commitment, you have power. He did a little example, and it's the same thing, and you see this all the time, and I think we've even talked about this. When you start looking for something, you see it everywhere. It becomes part of your conscious mind. So if you're looking to buy a new car, say a Mercedes-Benz, all of a sudden, you see them everywhere. Your reticular activating system causes you to notice. So the unconscious kind of comes in line with the conscious, and you see that Mercedes everywhere you drive, even though it was there before and you never noticed it. That focus and power and clarity happens the same way if you decide what you want from your life and your purpose. We all have a ton of desires, but the thing we don't do is take massive action. Taking massive action with effective communication is what brings about success. So, what massive action can you take this week to bring about change? Now, I'm going to say people think of massive action, it's more than I can do. It doesn't need to be that massive of an action, I think. We've talked about the power of compounding, how 1 penny can turn into $10 million inside of 30 days if you just double it every day. And so if you think about that, if you just take small steps, but start taking action and continue to increase the action you take and allow the action to compound, massive action is not that difficult to achieve. The other thing Tony talks about is grace. Whether you believe in God or the universe or however it is to have faith in power bigger and beyond us. So learning to be in that state of grace and be happy for whatever the moment is. And as I said, in the morning, I wake up now in a state of grace because I know I've got a soft bed, a roof over my head, everything that I need, food in the fridge. Truly, I'm living better than most of the world in history. And even everyone in this country, for the most part, has got more than most people in the world. So have grace for that. So let me ask you a question. What lights you up? What is it that gives you fulfillment in your life? What could you do for hours if nobody paid you to do it? Tony said most people die inside and live a long life. And think about it. If you're dying inside and living a long life, you're surely not going to have a life of fulfillment and success. When you start looking for success, it's easier to find. And that's what we talk about. Look for little things of success. And once you start looking for it, everything starts to become an excuse for success. It's the same thing, when something goes wrong, we start finding all the excuses for why it went wrong. Well, if we want to have success and we start looking for success, we'll start finding all the reasons and the excuses to have success. So, does this mean that we can't be negative, we can't be upset when someone cuts us off, all those types of things? Absolutely not. Tony talked about that. He says, I do get angry and I've learned to deal with it. And we've all got a favorite flavor of suffering. And you all know it. It's all kind of wired into the way we behave. And what Tony says is, you know what? When you find yourself in that situation, take 90 seconds to have pity on yourself, whine about your problem and your thing, and then get over it and move along and stop letting yourself into that downward spiral. Sometimes in order to do that, you have to change the way that you look at the situation. And so if you look at every situation and say, what am I here to learn in this moment from this situation? You change your focus and you change the way that you behave. So when someone cuts you off, what you're learning in that situation is how to be calm under stress. And there are probably 100 other types of situations just like that you can think of that will help you and that you can learn from. When you change the way you react, you change the course of what's going on. And when you're happy and you're in that joyful state, you just can't be angry. And when you're angry, you can't be joyful. And so you've got to learn to shift states. And that was one of the things that Tony taught us to do quite well, is to constantly shift states. When you're going 14, 16 hours a day, you would think you'd be tired sitting there. But we weren't. He learned how to shift our states, keep us moving, and keep us constantly in just that flow state of energy. One of the biggest things that comes along with that is deep breathing. He even said that might be why some people get addicted to cigarettes. Because if you think about it, if you're addicted to cigarettes and you're at work, what do you do when you get stressed? You stop your work, you walk away for 10 minutes. When you suck on that cigarette, you're inhaling it, you're breathing deeply. And that gives you a certain sense of relaxation. And then you can go back and face the situation. Now, I'm not telling you to start smoking. Please don't. It's horrible for you. I know I went through that for years. Not an easy habit to break. But if we take the minute when we're in that stressful situation and we take the deep breath, we set off a whole set of reactions within our body that can help us change our state. If you can learn to laugh at situations and laugh at failure, well, then you can't be angry and you can't be upset. And the reality is, if you're only going to be happy when things go your way, you're not going to be happy very often. So you've got to learn to let go and to learn to be happy and laugh regardless of the situation. He said, trade your expectations for appreciation and your whole life will change in that moment. We all have all these expectations of things. What if we just appreciated whatever happened at that moment instead of having an expectation that disappointed us? And you need to learn to do these in your tired, stressed state. It's doing difficult things, doing the grind. And I think that's why the whole registration process and where we were and how things were done by Tony, I think he wanted us in that tired, stressed state that I was in that Thursday morning to show me how, within seconds, that can change and how I have the power to make that change. It's overcoming ourselves, the voices in our head, and the fear that we have. And he defined fear. Fear is false evidence appearing real. And we have these fears and things because of the stories that we tell ourselves that imprison us. And the two things that really imprison us are, number one, I am not enough. And number two, if I am not enough, I won't be loved. And if I'm not loved, I'm worthless. And that leads to depression and failure. And we need to control those thoughts on our own. No one else can do that for us. If you think about it, in the animal kingdom, humans have one of the longest levels of dependency on parents. As a baby, we can't do anything. As it is, it's quite a while. It's a year before we walk. It's 2 before we talk. And we actually spend the first 6 years of our lives learning how to behave socially and how to do things and how to act and how to react to the society that we live in. And if you think about the way kids behave, it becomes clear. When your parents ignore you, the child doesn't feel loved. He feels fearful. So what do? The kid does something wrong because that brings the parent there to yell at the child. And while it's not the perfect outcome, the reality is that doing that at least brings the parent involvement into the child's life. And we continue that pattern of maybe not always doing things right so that we get noticed. And even if the recognition's bad, it's still recognition. And one of the things, and we talked about this from the mindset book, when you celebrate a child's success, they are conditioned to want to succeed, but they fear failure. And so we have to be very careful with how we talk to them about success and talk more about the hard work that led to success than innate characteristics like you're so smart, you did well on that test, versus you worked hard, you did well on that test. The child who hears the first is afraid to fail, and so they won't try. The child that realizes that it's hard work is more willing to do the work because that is what's rewarded. So what's your strategy to deal with fear? What stories and limitations hold you back? One of the things that Tony did was to say, when you've got these fears and they're attacking you, if you try to fight them, they're going to overrun you and win the battle. But if you dance with your fears and you allow them in and you overcome them, you have the ability for success. And literally what he did was he brought a big guy up out of the audience and he had him grab his arm and pull him. And you think about it. So here's someone grabbing your arm and pulling you, and that's your fear. And what are you doing? You're pulling it back, and you're in this constant tug of war. And then Tony switched the way he dealt with it. And when the man started pulling him, Tony put his other hand on the man's shoulder and went with the pulling. And he started essentially dancing with the pull. So we dance with our fears, we let it go through, and what happens after a while is that the fear gets tired of pulling us, because as we take action, as we start doing things, we overcome that fear. Instead of constantly fighting it, we learn to soften it and to put it down. And when we dance with it, we learn the meaning behind it and what creates that emotion. And then we can start to make choices about how we're going to deal with that situation. Another thing that Tony talked about is transformational vocabulary. What words trigger our emotions and our reactions? And what new scripts can we create dealing with bad situations that are going to happen? And they are going to happen. That's just the reality of it. And how do we control our state, change our focus, and control the way our body feels? How do we command our heart and our soul to live the life we choose to live? It's our choice. We're all going to be faced with problems. It's up to us to figure out how we're going to overcome those. There are some programs that you can use and some ways to make changes that help you bring about this change. One of the things that was talked about was Neuro associative conditioning. And so basically it lays out into 5 steps. The first one is to know your outcome. We've talked about this. Where are you going? What do you want? Know your reason why. Why must you do this? If you don't have a good reason why, while we may have that purpose, we're not going to put our time and energy towards it. Take massive action. We've already talked about that. And massive action doesn't need to be so massive, but you've got to stop thinking about it and stop being fearful of it and start moving towards it. Know what you're getting. Change your approach and your course constantly. So the example he used was an airplane. An airplane is going from, let's say, New York to London. At a given point in time, more often than not, the airplane is off course. And they're constantly making slight corrections to get it back on course. But if the plane goes off course and you don't make slight corrections, you're going to end up in a very different place than what you intended. And so constantly looking and double checking in and making small corrective actions to make sure you're still heading towards the course and the direction that you want. Everybody needs a GPS, basically. And that's where books, mentors, mastermind groups, family, business partners, coaches can help you to make sure that you are being true to what you say you want to do and that you're keeping on your life's GPS. One of the other things that we have to focus on is that people look backward, not forward. And so you constantly see failure. Remember, the past does not equate to the future unless you live there. Look at all the guests we've had on who've talked about their life stories. Many of them have pasts that would never, ever point to the future that they have. But they all had a why. They all had clarity that they wanted to go somewhere. And they all took action and just kept going that direction. Even when they fell down, they course corrected. And each of them had something or someone who came along the way and helped them achieve the life they wanted to live. And so we have to be sure in our beliefs and know that there is certainty in what we want. and why it is that we want that. So, how do we go about changing these habits? One of the things is to get leverage in the change. The second is to interrupt the limiting pattern that's there. And lastly, it's to create a new empowering pattern to replace it. So if you want to quit cigarettes, you need to replace quitting cigarettes with something else so that when you get in that state that you need a cigarette, you have something else that you can do to help you through that point. Getting leverage means that you've got help or you've got tools or some kinds of systems in place to break that pattern and to help you break the pattern that you're in. You've got to figure out how to change the state and interrupt the pattern that you're constantly falling into. Because for most of us who have certain habits, we do them unconsciously. And we've talked about the ability to break those unconscious habits. One of the issues that comes up when we want to break a habit is that the joy of the moment outweighs the bad outcome of the future. And that is something that you've got to shift your perspective so that the bad outcome of the future is more harmful and more punishing in your mind than the joy of the moment. So for me, I always grew up with this belief that at 50 years old, a lot of people would lose their jobs because life and industry would change. And here you'd be at the top of your career and you'd lose your job through no fault of your own. And because you were so specialized, you couldn't find another job. And everything you had built up over this lifetime would come crumbling down. And that fear made me set up automated savings and plan out a path so that I knew that when I was 50, if that happened to me, I would be able to survive. When you look for something, you find it, right? So that's continuously been shown to me over life. The first job I had, that business essentially went out of business because technology replaced and changed the way that we did business. And so that business essentially disappeared. The second job I had in sales, they had a unique product that became a commodity product. And when you're a commodity product, you no longer have pricing power. There went essentially that whole industry. In the meantime, when you look at going through multiple recessions and when you see the world changing, the Wall Street Journal is always full of articles about the guy who was 50 years old, especially 2008, 2009, lost his high-paying job, living on the edge, and his whole world came crashing down, and he goes from making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to essentially having nothing. And I always had that fear in the back of my mind. And so sometimes our fears can be good because that forced me to make decisions and make sacrifices in the moment for a better future outcome. And that's a very, very difficult thing for many of us to do. And I think that's why so many of us get stuck in these patterns, and you need to break that pattern. We have to associate the change that we're making with massive, extraordinary, and immediate pleasure. And that's kind of the leverage. So sometimes, you probably hear the smoking or the drinking story most often with kids. When a kid comes up to a parent and says, "You're going to die, I don't want you to die, stop smoking." And that leverage of the child helps for us to overcome and bring about massive change. And we can. So there's a place where you can do massive, immediate change. Stopping to do a particular habit or starting to do a particular habit. So stopping smoking is one way. Stopping eating certain types of food is another. Starting going to the gym is another. And when you take massive action of going to the gym, you don't need to go to the gym and say, I'm going to do this 6 days a week and I'm going to start with heavy weights. Just go. Just take small action and go. That's what helped me. When I first started going to the gym, I joined a group that was an accountability group. And they basically said, in order to be part of this group and to be part of our community, they were my leverage. You have to go to the gym at least 3 times a week. There were people who would come into this group and sign up and want to go to the gym 6 days a week, and they'd constantly fail because life got in the way. I went in and said, okay, the minimum commitment's 3 days a week. I'm going to go to the gym 3 days a week. And I wanted to do more than that. What I said then is I'm going to have a bonus. My stretch goal is 5 days a week. Every week I hit my minimum. I was guaranteed because I knew I could get there 3 days a week. And there were days that I got up to 5. And then there are days where we go on business trips or vacations, and people would fall apart at these points because they'd set themselves up for unrealistic things. I'm on vacation. I'm going to find a gym and do my normal routine. I didn't do that. I said, I know I'm on vacation. I don't know what I'm walking into. I will exercise 3 times that week that I'm on vacation the best I can with whatever I find where I go. So I set up success patterns, and I made sure that I was able to do things that I would be successful at. And after about 6 to 9 months, maybe it was a year in that group, those patterns were ingrained in me. I no longer needed the accountability group to keep going. I think it's the same thing with Alcoholics Anonymous. They've got an accountability partner there to help you. That's the leverage when you're trying to go about making these changes. You can use your kids, your wife, business partner. Find people who can help give you the leverage and the accountability to continue making the change you want in your life. What Tony basically taught us is to break the pattern, to put ourselves in a peak state. In other words, we're positive, we're pumped up, we're ready to bring about change, and then you go about making that change. When you're in that positive mindset versus negative mindset, you have the ability to move forward. It's constant. Here's the thing, and we talked about certain things that we learn certain behaviors as a kid, and it goes into adulthood. Well, if we constantly are putting ourselves in a positive state throughout the day, day after day, we start to automatically rewire our brains and rewire ourselves to constantly be in that positive state instead of the negative state. That's kind of what we need to do, is to rewire our programming and to be able to do that. So one of the ways to do that is to look around at the people around you. Are they bringing you up or are they bringing you down? You've got to make sure that the people around you are taking you up instead of bringing you down. And that may mean you have to change your friends or your peer groups, or find a group that can allow you to be able to do this. One of the other things Tony did was to create a wheel of life to see where we are. And I'm going to create one for Richer Soul myself. I just have to figure out how. I know what I want and how to design it. I just need to get it done. So hopefully we'll have that all for you shortly. But basically his was your physical body, your emotions and meaning, relationships, time, career mission, finances, and how much you celebrate and contribute. And you just basically, you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 across all of these. And then you kind of see across this circular pattern how you are on those. And the thing you have to realize is if a certain area of your life is at a 1 or a 2, even if all the other areas are a 10, as that wheel goes round, it bumps hard on the 2. and that too can drag down the rest of your life. So you need to have balance across all the different areas of your life. And that's what we talk about here. Knowing your purpose and then having balance with health, your time, your mindsets, your money, your relationships, and your spirituality. They all need to find their way to have balance. If you're spending too much time trying to make money and you're ignoring your family and your health, you're not going to have the outcomes you want. You've got to make sure that all of those puzzle pieces fit together. One of the things that Tony talked about is the 2mm rule, where a very small adjustment can make a massive change. In the example of the game of golf, if you move that club 2 millimeters, how much does it change your golf game? Plastic surgery is very much the same way as well. Just slight differences, 2 millimeter differences in the way certain things are in your face bring about the difference that makes someone absolutely beautiful. And if you think about it in other parts of your life, if you just started saving 2% today, and every year you just made a 2% difference in your savings rate, at the end of 10 years, you're saving 20%. At the end of 20 years, you're saving 40%, which means if you start at 25, by 45 years old, you're saving 40% of your income, which is massive. By 55, you're saving 60% of your income. And when you have that kind of a savings rate done 2% a year at a time, you don't worry about, is my college funded for my kids, or can I take a vacation? You have the ability to stroke checks for whatever you want. So when we talk about this massive action, small changes over time add up to tremendous things. The more progress we make, the happier we become. Somebody who goes from making $50,000 to $100,000 a year is very happy. The same guy who goes from $50,000 to $100,000 a year and the following year goes to $75,000 is unhappy. Even though 2 years ago he was at $50,000 and he's still making 50% more than he was 2 years ago, because he went backwards, he feels let down and he's not happy. So we constantly be making this forward progress. One of the things that Tony reiterated is our brain is not designed to make us happy. It's designed to keep us alive. And so many times our brain tricks us and gives us illusions of what's going on. We need to make sure that it's truly what we think, and it's not our brain tricking us into an illusion. Many of us want security, and he even said, if you want security, go to prison. You're fed, clothed, and given everything you need, but that really isn't the life you want to live, is it? So if you want an amazing life, you've got to stretch yourself, right? You've got to take action. You've got to lean into your fears. You've got to fail and figure out what went wrong and how to become better at it. You've got to make sure that your energy and your attitude are focused in the way that brings you to success. Once you start having success, success builds on success. So you need to change some of your words. So instead of saying, I should do this, you say, I must do this. So if we know we're going to have failure, one of the things that we need to do is to anticipate, to remove as many of the risks as we can from our life, which basically means if you're going to go invest in something, don't bet your entire wealth on one thing if you can lose it all. look at what are the risks of making a decision and do your best to know how you're going to handle the failure when it comes. And so if you've already got your plan in place, it's much easier to execute the plan when a bad outcome comes because you've already thought through what that is. You know how to handle that particular situation instead of worrying about how you're going to do it. I've kind of covered most of day one here, maybe a little bit of one of the other days as well. And this was a 4-day long seminar. But I just wanted to give you the basics. I can assure you, Tony does this much better than I do. If you were listening to Tony right now, you'd probably be jumping up and down and be in a very different state than you are listening to me as we go through this. I want to leave you with a handful of things. You've got to overcome your fears. You've got to find success. And the best way to find success is to know what you want to do and find people who've been successful in what you want to do. Look at their path and see which of their paths works best for you. And then start taking massive action on going towards that path. One of the biggest things you can do is just to simply say to those around you, I'm going to do this. And a lot of them are going to tell you you're crazy. Don't worry about that. We've got to eliminate the negativity and find the people who are going to support us. You might need to learn what you need to do to have success. Find people who can help you and support you on your path to success. Get away from people who are holding you back, who are living in that limited mindset instead of an abundance mindset. When you start taking massive action, when you start to make sure that you control your mind instead of you're letting your mind control you and saying, I can do these things, I will do these things, I'm not going to stay in this bad mood, then you have the ability to change the direction of your life. We've had so many guests on, I'm going to say this again and again, who've come from not the greatest ways of growing up, and yet they've had tremendous success. It's because they did that. They didn't let other people or the mindsets that they learned as kids or anything else prevent them from having the success they wanted. They just started taking action. They failed a lot. They went through the grind, and it is a massive grind. And they just kept going. When you listen to Tony's story, he failed a lot. He just kept doing it. He had lots of problems along the way. He had a horrible childhood experience as well. Yet, look at where he is now. He charges ungodly amounts of money to do business coaching. If you want him, I think it's like $1 million for the day, plus a % of your profits going forward. And he's booked out for probably 18 months before you can even get in to see him. One of the things that we really didn't talk about, and I'll touch on real quickly as we close out, that's the technique that he uses to get people to change the way they are. It's neuro-linguistic programming. Basically, what it is changing the way you think. Basically helps to change the language in your brain. It helps to overcome the mindsets and the limiting beliefs that you've had. It helps you to take action to bring about the changes that you want in your life. At the end of the day, it's a journey. You've got to figure out what works for you. Is Tony going to change your life if you go to this event? I don't know. It all depends on your attitude, how you show up, where you're at, and whether or not you're willing to listen and whether it works for you. It's not going to work for everyone. I'm sure that there's a lot of people who've gone there and have not had success. For a lot of them, I think there's a couple reasons behind that. One, they're not willing to listen and try. Two, they don't take massive action. They go for a weekend, they hear some stuff, and they come back, and then life gets back into the standard routine that it was, and we fall back into the patterns that we always follow. This is where having people around you and people who support you, who will push you forward, is the most important thing to do. You've also got to do that for your family, for your spouse and your kids, is make sure that you're also being the person who helps to push them forward. So these are the types of things that you can work together as a family as well. For those of you who are married with kids, you all support each other to push each of you forward in your respective areas. I know that's what we do with our kids and within our family. I've got teenagers and we have conversations all the time. I coach soccer, I coach robotics, and the biggest thing we do is to set massive, large goals. Then we just start taking the small steps to go there. We continue to break through our fear points and learn that once you practice and you put systemic routines in place and you take action, success follows. There's no secret other than doing the hard work and leaning in and just continuing to show up. Thank you for listening today. I hope I gave you at least a flavor of what Tony was all about. I can tell you the energy level in the room when Tony is on stage is through the roof. There is no other way you can get through literally 50 hours plus of sitting in a room with someone over 4 days and hardly any sleep and just be able to crank it out. So if you find yourself stuck and you're ready for massive change, go check out the program and see if it works for you. The best thing is a lot of his stuff is already on YouTube, so it costs you nothing but time. Just Google it and see what's out there. I know. I think my thoughts about Tony going back a few years were he was the guy on the infomercial who sold all those crazy products at night. Who is this guy? And yet, when the President of the United States calls him to solve a problem, I guess I should also be smart enough to listen as well. Thanks for listening. If you think this episode could help someone else, please share the podcast. I encourage you to do so. The more we help others, the more we get what we want. And if you'd like to chat with me about my experience with Tony, or if you have other questions or anything else, just email me. It's rocky@richardsoul.com. Have an abundant week. Go take some massive action. Thanks for listening.